What's up, everybody? Thank you guys for rolling in and joining us tonight. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. I'm really excited that tonight my good friend, my brother, everyone's favorite, Gerald Fadayomi, is going to be joining me in just a moment as we kind of begin a conversation to talk about what everybody's talking about right now. And that is all of the racial tensions and stuff going on in our country. And me as a white guy, I don't feel like I'm the best person probably to lead that discussion. So I'm going to try to do as much listening and just kind of being honest about my experiences and what's going on in my life as Gerald kind of leads the way and talks a lot about some stuff he's experienced and just a lot of the life experiences that he's been given as a black man in America, which is a very different experience than I've been a part of. So thank you so much for joining us and being a part of this. Once we probably get started in a few minutes and Gerald joins us, I'm probably going to turn off our comments. That way we don't get bogged down in what's happening down here, but we can really engage and listen to Gerald as he begins to kind of lead us and open an opportunity for us to listen as he just kind of shares everything that he's been through, not only in the last few weeks, but throughout his life. So I just saw in there now that Gerald just joined us. So, G, if you want to, whenever you're ready, request to join, and I'll buzz you in. Gerald, what's up, dude?
Not much, bro. How are you?
I'm good, man. Can you hear me good?
I can hear you great.
Awesome. I got my phone kind of propped up against my computer. That way I have my hands free because I talk with my hands a lot. So
I literally did the same.
Okay, good. Yeah, that makes me feel better. It's not just me. All right, dude. Well, people are going to start rolling in. I told everybody right before you joined, I'm probably going to turn the comments off while we're talking. Once we kind of get into the real stuff here, that way everybody's not focusing on what's happening down below us, but they're actually just kind of listening to what you're saying. So is that cool with you?
Yeah, that's fine. Do we want to do like a Q&A at the end?
Yeah, I was going to say I might turn them back on at the very end. That way if people have specific questions, we can address those, but they don't get bogged down in just shout outs and saying hey to people while we're trying to discuss some really serious stuff tonight. So that's kind of what I was thinking, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, it's great.
Awesome.
I think I saw Mary Ellen on. Hey, Matt. Brody!
A lot of familiar faces rolling through.
Guys, sorry. I'll be doing this all night. Like, all of my favorite people are getting on. Y'all, I miss y'all so much.
Let's be honest. The real reason I said I was going to turn that off is because it would just be an entire love fest for Gerald in the comments. And we wouldn't get anything done. So there's Mary Ellen. Hey, Matt.
I miss y'all so much. This is a weird way to say hey again, but
yeah, I know. Well, see, what everybody doesn't know, I tried to keep it a secret, but you were supposed to make your grand reappearance back to Brownsbridge Inside Out at the end of March, but then COVID-19 happened and the quarantine lockdown, and we had to figure it out. But whenever we get back into the building, we'll have you back real soon.
Come on, I can't wait.
That's awesome. Well, if you're ready, G, I'm gonna go ahead and dive in because I know some people have set aside time to listen to us, so we won't reminisce too much on the Glory Day. But we'll talk about just kind of some of the issues and stuff that's going on right now in our country. And I kind of told everybody as they were rolling in, and for the folks who've just joined us, I was like, I don't want to do a lot of talking tonight. I want to do a lot of listening. I think that's a good practice for everybody whose skin complexion looks a lot more like mine in this season, is to just listen to your experience, to your life examples, things that have happened to you, and just kind of how you are leading us to make our country a more gospel-focused place, a place that looks like what Jesus told us. And so I think in our country, we got a lot of work to do when it comes to race relations. And I kind of want you to lead out in a lot of those combos tonight, G, if that's cool with you.
Sure. Yeah. That works.
Awesome, man. Well, if you will, just kind of start us back. I guess let's think back to like Gerald. I won't tell everybody how many years ago, but talk about like when you were a little kid and you, I guess, kind of began to notice that you were treated differently because of your skin color, or I know you've got some specific stories that I've heard before, but what's like some of your earliest memories or an early memory where you felt like, oh, it's different for me because I'm black, versus like what somebody like me could have possibly experienced? Like, do you have like a specific example of something, that you're like, oh, that's when I kind of realized that it's different for for Black folks here?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't know that there's anything from my childhood. It probably wasn't until like high school that I first like really felt it. Um, Most of like elementary school, if you were at Brownsbridge, you know a little bit of my story. Like it was just crazy, and I had a really unique upbringing with a mom who had schizophrenia and bouncing around, homeless, and in foster care, and so I didn't really notice anything other than like survival as a little kid. But it was probably around high school at Alpharetta High School where I went that I started to like really notice that there was some differences with race. We had a program called M to M at our school, which is minority to majority, and so they would run buses from under resourced communities in Atlanta up to Alpharetta so that people could get better educations. And it was a group of Black kids, and so I became friends with a lot of those students who were coming up to Alpharetta. But then I also had white friends that I played basketball with, or that I'd grown up going to elementary and middle school with as well. And so I constantly found myself in this middle ground where I was like too Black for my white friends, but too white for my Black friends. And so I had like surface friendships, but never like deep friendships on either side. And so definitely a lot of like trying to figure out what that looked like, how it all worked together. The thing that's interesting though for me is almost all of my white friends went to Inside Out when I was in high school. But I never got invited to Inside Out, and I'm not really sure why. Right? Like, and I don't think it was innately racist, but maybe it was like one of those things where like I'm not sure if he would like this or if it feels like a place for him. And that was part of like my passion around BBIO and going like, hey, we want every student at every school to experience the love of God, because there are people in our communities who are missing out on the best thing that our community has to offer in the hope of Jesus. And so, yeah, I think it was probably around high school that I first started to realize like, oh, there's a divide, and my white friends kind of hang out together and my Black friends kind of hang out together. And there's a couple of us who get to live in the middle, but for the most part, it's pretty separate.
Yeah, I think it was similar for me. Like as a kid growing up, I grew up in rural Alabama, so about as different from Alpharetta as you can get.
Yeah.
But I think, as a kid, like I didn't think about those things. I mean, I had white kids and Black kids, other minorities in my school. I mean, for rural Alabama, we were more diverse than probably a lot of schools that would be a similar like area to me. But I think the big thing that was different was, I grew up in a Christian household, and my parents, kind of taught us to, love everyone no matter what they look like. I grasped that. It wasn't really for me until like high school as well, when, people that I was friends with started like making jokes, or they started like, having like, using slang words that white people shouldn't use and stuff like that. And I began to kind of like, I didn't know how to react to it. And I think probably my experience, similar to a lot of white folks, it was like, silence. Like it's like I don't know what to do with that, so I'm going to do nothing with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that's coming out with a lot of the stuff that's happened recently. I think that a lot of folks that grew up maybe more like me, maybe not in an overtly racist environment, but maybe like a more subtly, or maybe more just like a prejudice type thing, are beginning to realize like, hey, we can't keep staying silent.
Yeah.
And so I know you've talked a lot about that, but what do you think is kind of like, how can we as believers, as Christians, as people who want to show the love of Jesus to everyone that we come across, how can we begin to understand the difference between I'm not a racist to me being anti-racism? Like I feel like that's a big discussion that's happening in our world right now. Like talk about that for a minute or two.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. One, my friend Joseph Sojourner has been saying this phrase, silence is violence. And the idea essentially is when you're silent about oppression, you're participating in the oppression, right? And whether that's on a public platform or privately with your family and friends, like something has to be said when bad things happen, when hard things happen to people. And if we don't speak up, we're a part of the problem, And so I think us using our voice is a really big deal. Part of the reason that I've even been talking about this as much as I have is because one of my goals in these conversations is to try to help people understand that these are not far off cases. These are not like things that are distant that other people in rural cities are dealing with. And it's once every now and then that this is happening. This is like day to day life for us. If you're a person of color, a Black person in America, more than likely at some point in your life, you're going to experience some sort of discrimination, injustice. I mean, it may be subtle. It may be being followed around a store. It may be a subtle comment under someone's breath. It may be someone crossing the other side of the street when they see you walking by. It may be a situation like I had when I was 19, getting arrested at a pool for eating pizza with friends. And then after spending a night in jail, in two different jails actually, waking up the next morning, spending the rest of the day in jail, and then seeing a judge that following Monday, and the judge going, "You should have been given a warning for trespassing and sent home," right? But because there was a neighbor in the neighborhood who saw some black kids sitting at a pool eating pizza, and there had been some robberies in their neighborhood recently, they assumed that we were up to the worst, just because of prejudice or racism or whatever you want to call it, you know? And so I think I want people to understand, like, if you went to Brownsbridge Inside Out, you know me, right? Like, we've spent time together, we've invested in each other, we've laughed together, we've had moments together, and it's easy to think that these moments are happening for people who are far off. It's harder to believe that it's happening to people who are close to you. And so that was one of the goals, is just help people see that this is not a far off thing. So your original question was, okay, how do we do something about this? Like, how do we go from I'm not racist, it's not my fault, to anti-racist? I think the thing that's really important for all of us to understand, and the younger that we can grasp this, the better off we'll be, is just because something is not your fault does not mean it's not your responsibility, right? And so you may not have caused it, you may not be the problem, but just because it's not your fault doesn't mean that you shouldn't be part of the solution, doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to do something to fix it. And especially if we wear the banner of Christians, right? Like, if we say that we're followers of Jesus, we should stand up and fight against any oppression that's happening to any people group in the world, right? Like, not even just in our own communities in the world, which is why you do mission trips at Brownsbridge, right? You're making a decision to go into other parts of the world and go, there are things happening here that aren't okay. It's not okay for kids to be growing up in an orphanage. It's not okay for their parents to not want to be with them. It's not okay for kids in other countries to have undrinkable water. So we're going to go and be part of the solution. It's easy to do it overseas. It's harder to do it right here in our community. And so what do we do about that? What does that practically look like? Because I think it's easy to talk about the hurt and not talk about solutions. And so I want to give three really practical things. And I want to give them from the perspective of Jesus, because I think it's dangerous when we speak on just our opinion, when as followers of Jesus we've decided to ascribe to his moral compass, his code, to his way of living. And so I'll use the example that Jesus has given. He's asked the question, "Who is my neighbor?" by a teacher of the law. And if you've followed any of the stuff that I've been talking about, you've probably heard this already. He's asked the question, "Who is my neighbor?" The question is asked to avoid loving his neighbor well by this teacher of the law. Jesus tells this story, and some context is important here. He tells the story of a Jew and a Samaritan, right? We know the story as the Good Samaritan. The context here that's really important is that Jews and Samaritans were two racial groups who hated each other. They did not get along. There was a lot of history, a lot of conflict there. The
Sounds
Samaritan,
familiar, right?
say it again.
Sounds familiar.
Right, right. The Samaritan would have been the equivalent as the black in the U.S., right? It's the race that has been oppressed, the race that feels like they're fighting for some sort of status, some sort of belonging, some sort of things being right for them. And then you have the Jewish people, who's the racially superior race, right? So you have the Jews and the Samaritans. Jesus takes this story and uses it as an opportunity to take the racially inferior group and make them the hero of the story. It's just super interesting to me, which we could spend a whole bunch of time on that at another time. It's super interesting that he did that. But he tells the story of the Samaritan who sees this broken Jew on the road, who's been beaten up by robbers, who's been beaten up and had everything that he had stolen from him. And he talks about how two other Jewish men see this man and walk by him. Both of these guys are religious leaders. They walk to the opposite side of the street. One, because they didn't want to be unclean. They didn't want to get their hands dirty. And two, because they were in a rush. They had somewhere to be. They did not have time to deal with this issue. Then you have this Samaritan man who was busy as well, who was on his way to do something, but he sees this man who's beaten and broken on the side of the road, and he decides that it's his responsibility to do something about it. It's not his fault. He didn't cause it, but it is his responsibility. And so he offers this man help. He picks him up. He takes him to an inn. He pays for his time at the inn, and then he tells the innkeeper, "Hey, anything else that's owed, you put it on my tab. It's on me, and I'll come back and pay it." Right. So there's three things that happen in this really four things that happen in this really, really short story. One, there is no evidence or record in the story that Jesus made up to prove the point that the Samaritan ever asked, "How did you get beat up on the side of the road?" what caused you to be here? What has your community done to help you get back up? Right? Like there is none of this. What's your criminal record? We have to wait for the rest of the facts to come out before I can care about you or help you. Right? There is no record of that. Jesus doesn't show us that that's the way to respond in loving our neighbor. Rather, what happens is this man sees someone who's broken, and he instantly has compassion for him, and he responds out of compassion, and he can get to the facts later, right? Because we all have people in our life who we may not necessarily feel like they deserve help, but because we're Christians, we choose to love them and help them anyway, right? And so maybe they're not the model citizen, but at the end of the day, they're a human. And a broken human deserves the help of another human. That's what humanity is, right? So this man picks him up off the ground, and then the next thing he invests is his time, right? Like he's busy, he has other things to do, just like the other two Jewish guys who walk by. But instead, he invests his time in this relationship to help this man get back on his feet. And then he takes him to the inn, and he pays for his time at the inn. He uses his resources, the money that's been given to him, however he's earned it. He uses that for the benefit of this man who's been beaten, robbed, hurt. Then lastly, he says to the innkeeper, "Hey, anything that's owed, put it on me, my tab." Right? What's that? It's influence, right? If if I call you, Heath, and I'm like, "Hey, bro, I have a buddy who's coming in town. Can you take him to dinner? I'm not sure he can pay for it, but just whatever it is, like, just let me know and I'll Venmo you." Right? I can ask you to do that because we have a relationship that over time I've gained influence in your life, right?
Right.
Where you go, I trust Gerald, So whatever he asks me, I can do, and I can trust that he's going to pay me back. So we see in this story, this man uses his time, his resources, his influence for the benefit of someone who's broken and hurting. That's what we should do as Christians for any community, for any group of people who are broken or hurting. Right now in our country, that's people of color, it's African Americans who are broken and hurting by a system of oppression that's been built for hundreds of years. We have a responsibility as Christians because this is what Jesus modeled, to invest our time, our resources, and our influence for those issues.
Yeah, dude, that's really good. And I think that as Christians, we have to have that perspective because I think, if you pay attention to everything going on, I think politics and people's opinions and issues that aren't the primary issue, but issues that are like, on the outside, people start bringing those in and try to make them the primary issue. But I like how you drilled in to say, let's look at an example Jesus gives us.
Yeah.
And I think that when you look at people who are hurting, people who are in a situation like the man laying on the side of the road, we didn't wait for the facts to come out, as you pointed out. We didn't, try to say, well, we need to really ramp up road security. Like we need to start, we didn't start focusing on all of the secondary, third, fourth issues. He focused on the issue that was at hand. And I think that that's the big thing that I hope and I pray is beginning to shift in our country, is beginning to change. I've heard it said that for a long time, when it comes to the issue of race in our country, imagine like if you and I were standing like back to back to one another, right? And say, hey, I want you to look at race. And we're standing back to back. I'm looking this way and you're looking this way. And I'm looking, as a white man looking at race and like, man, we're not where we used to be, right?
Yep.
Like nobody would argue that it's not the way it was, like for our grandparents' generation, our great grandparents' generation. But I feel like the black community in the country looks at race facing the other way, and they're like, we're not where we need to be either.
Right.
So I think when we talk about race, we have two people looking at the same thing, but they're looking in wrong directions. Yeah. And I think what the white community is beginning to do, what the white community is beginning to do is to see it how the black community does.
Yeah, that's good. So I want to address a couple of things that you said. One, secondary issues. Let's talk about some of the secondary issues that are being brought up, because what most of you won't see is you see like public support on my posts, but you don't see the DMs that I get of people who are going, what about this? What about this? What about this? So let's talk about some of the secondary issues that have been brought to my attention, and I'll just address them publicly for anyone who's watching. One, the riots. The question is constantly asked, well, what about the riots? This is violent. It's not okay. They're destroying property. People have worked really hard to build these businesses, and now you have all of these African Americans who are destroying cities and burning things down and rioting against the police. Okay. One, the media does a really good job of highlighting things that are going to draw viewership, right? What's not going to draw viewership are peaceful protesters. What is going to draw viewership are burning buildings. Okay? So we're seeing a portion of the story, not the story in totality. The reality is there are thousands of people across the country who are peacefully protesting, and there's story after story after story of the peaceful protesters correcting the people who are rioting because they're pulling away from the primary issue and causing attention to be given to the secondary issue, right? Now, with that said, riots are inexcusable. It's not okay. They should not be happening. Looting should not be happening. And it's unfortunate that it does, because it does draw away from people who are actually doing it the right way. With that said, it's also understandable, right? Like, we're talking to high school students right now, so let me just put it in high school terms. Your parents do something that really frustrates you, and you try over and over and over again to explain to them your perspective, and they cannot hear it, they will not see it, they don't understand. So you get so mad that you go up to your room, you slam the door, and you punch a hole in the wall. Okay. Punching a hole in the wall is inexcusable. And we would all agree on that. It didn't solve anything, it didn't help anything, but it felt good for a minute, because you could not figure out how to get your point across. And so you got so angry that all you could do was take it out on something, right? Now, I want you to take that feeling, multiply it by hundreds of years of slavery, years, like multiple years of segregation in the civil rights movement. And now for the last, we can say 50 to 60 years of freedom, right? And in these 50 to 60 years, in a matter of a month, we have the story of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, right? The frustration builds to a level that when no one else is listening, you just want to punch a hole in the wall. So while it's inexcusable, and I would never do it, I can understand where they're coming from, right? So that's a secondary issue. Another secondary issue that's been brought to my attention, there's a lady named Candace Owens, a Black lady who shot a video talking about how she does not support George Floyd. So I want to address that really quickly. I understand where she's coming from. I do. And I think it's important for us to understand, like, not all Black people think the same, and that's okay. It's okay for us to have differing thoughts. Yeah, jump in.
Will you explain? I know where you're going with this. I listened to you and Marquise's thing. Will you
Yep.
explain like the monolith thing? Like you hear people say Black culture is not a monolithic culture. I think it's a good point to explain that.
Yeah, so monolithic, I was going to use that term and then I went, I don't know if I should use it in this form. Monolithic just basically means everyone thinks and behaves in the same way. Not all people of any race think and behave in the same way. In any culture, everyone thinks differently. Unfortunately, though, as a Black person listening or speaking right now, some people listening will go, "Oh, well, Gerald's explaining what it's like to be Black." No, Gerald's explaining what it's like for him to be Black, right? Like, you could get somebody else on here and it could be a completely different conversation. Now, obviously, with any viewpoint, there are going to be people who support that viewpoint. So I am speaking for a segment of Black culture, but not for all of it. Candace's opinions are her opinions, and I totally understand where she's coming from. Here's where it differs for us. We're Christians, okay? So she can hold a position of, he was a criminal, he had a criminal record, he was high at the time of death, so we're not going to celebrate who he was or any, that's fine, whatever. There is no justification for his death, and she even admitted that. Okay, now as a Christian, we have been given grace over and over and over again. For every time we've sinned, for every time we've failed, the grace of God has been available to us. If God held the position that some of us want to hold as it relates to someone who has a criminal history, then none of us would make it to heaven. So we have to be careful holding people to a standard that we wouldn't want God to hold us to, right? So if because of your sin one time, or because you've had a history of struggling with the same thing over and over again, God decided, you know what, you deserve to die and you never can make it into heaven with me. You would go, wait, that's not fair. Jesus died for me, right? Well, Jesus also died for George Floyd. And if he made a decision, put his faith in Jesus, then he can have eternal life as well, right? Like, so we as Christians have to make the decision to extend grace in the same way that God's extended grace to us, which is why for me, his criminal history does not matter, because at the end of the day, he's a human, right? So again, that's a secondary issue. The primary issue that we're talking about here is that for over 400 years, African Americans have been oppressed in this country, to the point that there have been laws that would state that my Black humanity is only worth 3/5 of a person. That was a law, right?
For a long time.
Yeah, for a very long time. And some would say, well, that was a really long time ago. Gerald, we're like in 2020. Okay, let's fast forward to 1987, which was 33 years ago. Mind you, I'm only 30, right? So this is 3 years before I was born. In Forsyth County, where I was a student pastor and where I still serve churches today, um, up until 1987, it was a sundown county, meaning that Black people could not be in the county after dark. Okay, this is 33 years ago. So just imagine I'm born 20 years earlier. I would have never been the student pastor at Brownsbridge. It's not possible, right? So 33 years is not a long time. This is very recent history. And I think sometimes we want to make it like, oh, that happened so long ago, but it wasn't that long ago. It's still relevant today. And so I just wanted to speak to some of the secondary things because it's really easy to lose sight of what's important and what we're actually talking about because we're looking for ways to justify what's happening because we don't want to feel bad about it. But sometimes it requires us to be broken in order to move forward.
Man, that was great. I think that was very well said. I was trying to think of a way to, I guess, kind of like bring that into it, to bring the like, we're Brownsbridge inside out. Like, there's a lot of white people who are probably tuning in, a lot of them watching, listening to you, and while they can empathize with what you're saying and what it's like for you to be Black and some of these things, for a lot of them, it's really hard to put themselves in your shoes because they grew up in a very different world, a very different environment. Um, I read some stuff this week and looking at everybody posting for Blackout Tuesday and things like that. For a lot of our white friends who are watching, what are some things that you feel like is the white people's responsibility to step up during the season? I think more white people than ever are beginning to empathize with everything going on in the Black community, but I don't think that any of them have clear, tangible, like what we can do to help. You look at social media on Black Tuesday, and everybody's willing to do something.
Mm-hmm.
But was that helpful, or was that just bringing more awareness to a thing that everyone's pretty aware of at this point? So, like, and I'm not making say that was right or wrong, but like, for all of white people listening, like, what is something that they can? What can we do? How can we begin to turn that tide?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's honestly part of the biggest frustration is trying to figure out what policy needs to change in order to correct hundreds of years of history. It's really difficult to do. And there are a lot of really smart people of color who are working on solutions right now to try to figure out what's the bill that needs to be written. There's a hate crime bill that they're working on for the state of Georgia right now. And so there's a lot of people trying to figure that out. My brother, actually, who's in law school at Emory right now, called me with the solution of every police officer having to have insurance in order to be a police officer, and had all of these like ways that it would actually increase the wages of officers and create accountability. And so, there's people who are working on solutions. For us as individuals, especially as a high school student, right? I'm going to go back to the 3 points from Jesus. So time, resources, influence. And I'm going to try to make them as tangible and practical as possible. Your time. We have to take the time to understand history. We got to take the time to understand it. Nobody wants to read extra books in high school. I didn't, right? Like, I used Cliff Notes to get through all of my classes. But
earmuffs, everybody! Don't listen to Gerald.
They're doing it already anyway. They're already doing it. But if you want to be an advocate in this space, if you want to be helpful in this space, it's going to require you to do some research, and it's not going to be as quick as watching a couple of YouTube videos, right? There are books that you should read. There's one called The Color of Compromise. It's a great book. There's another one called Blood at the Root that actually talks about the racist history in Forsyth County. That's worth a good read. That's a good read. That's worth reading. There's another book called Be a Bridge, I believe is the name of it, by Latasha Morrison. Her Instagram account is at Be a Bridge Builder, and everyone should follow Latasha Morrison right now. Like, she is leading the way and helping bridge the gap between Black and white communities in our country right now. She's really, really great. So those are 3 great books to read. But then I would also say, in terms of investing your time, right, like, have a conversation with people of color who are in your life. If you have a Black friend at your school, you should call them or text them and ask, hey, how are you doing? How are you processing all of this? Make them aware that you see their humanity, and then ask them questions about their experience. Hey, have you ever had something like this happen to you? Has this ever happened to somebody in your family? Is there anything that I can be doing for you right now? Like, help me understand your perspective. Hey, I have questions about this. I don't like exactly what we're doing right now. Hey, help us understand this because I don't fully get it, right? Like, and so having those conversations on a personal level can make a world of difference. So that's time. Resources. There are great organizations that are working very, very hard to deal with some of the causes or some of the effects um, of oppression that Black culture is dealing with. So I was having a conversation with someone last night. Actually, they were texting me all these stats about the Black community and how abortion rates are higher and how Black on Black violence is really high. And I had to pause them for a minute and go, hey, like those things that you're stating right now are true, but there's history that caused them. And so you can't just point to the effect without first understanding the cause. So that goes back to time. Go back and understand, take the time to do the research so you understand why these statistics may be true. But then his question was, well, what about the Black community? Don't they have any responsibility in this? It's a great question. It's a fair question, right? And again, you should have someone that you can privately have these conversations with. That was a really great question. I then asked him, hey, could you do the research to understand the organizations that do exist, right? And then invest your resources into those organizations because the reality is there are actually a lot of really great Black organizations that are working to beat some of the statistics that are true about our community that are a result of years of oppression and systemic racism, right? And so, two that I recommend are the Thurgood Marshall scholarship, Thurgood Marshall College Scholarship Fund. It's a fund for Black students who attend historically Black colleges and universities, and it helps them graduate without debt from college, which for a lot of my white brothers and sisters, their parents help pay for their college education. My reality and a lot of my friends' reality is that our parents couldn't afford to do that. And so we have to graduate with $30, $40, $50,000 worth of debt. And even with a college degree, you're starting off at a deficit. And so this organization helps to provide funds so that students don't have to graduate with that much debt. And then there's another organization called EJI. It's the Equal Justice Initiative. And they work on prison reform, police reform. They work on helping incarcerated people who've been falsely incarcerated, especially people of color. And so I've donated money to those organizations. I've asked friends to donate money to those organizations, but we invest our resources in those places. And then lastly, our influence. And that's Blackout Tuesday, right? That's raising your voice. That's using your influence, your platform, the stage that God has given you for the benefit of people who are broken, right? And so, yeah, I mean, posting on social media is helpful, but I'd also say private conversations are helpful. And if you hear a friend use a word that they shouldn't be using, you call it out and tell them to cut it out. If you hear people saying things that feel like it's innately racist, you go, hey, that's not okay. We don't like think like that. And if that's the way that you want to think or behave, like, I don't know if I want to be around that. I don't know if we can be friends. If you hear your parents saying things like that, to graciously and humbly go, hey, mom, dad, like, we're Christians. We go to church. Is that the way that we should be talking about people? Is that the way that we should see them? And so I think using your influence in the spheres that you're in and going, hey, I'm going to stand up for what's right, even when it's really hard. So time, resources, influence.
Yeah, I think that's great because I think for a lot of people, as they're becoming more aware of the issues and what's going on, you see other people who have been aware of this a long time, they've been educated on this, and they've been in the game, and it seems like a lot of people are running when some of us white people are like, "Hey, we're still just learning how to walk in this game." Like we're taking baby steps, and people are like, "You got to do more, you got to do more," and I feel like they're just new to the game, and so I think you gave everybody some really tangible early steps. Like you're not saying, hey, you've got to go and change our country's history for the last 400 years because that seems like a daunting task that nobody can tackle. But you get really good tangible like baby steps to take. I think also just like as a part of my experience in trying to wrestle with all this, and you and I have had a couple of conversations around the race stuff, and even I posted something a couple weeks ago that you called me and were like, hey, what did you mean by this? And
Yeah.
and I think that like having people in your life that you can have those conversations with, and it's not awkward, it's not weird, it's just like, well, I meant this. Did that come across? And like having people to like bounce those ideas off of as you're trying to do good things. Say, hey, is this helping or hurting? Because I'm just trying to figure it out. I think is a big deal. There's one thing that you mentioned, and I'm probably going to get real down into the weeds here for this next question. Okay.
Okay.
There's one thing that you mentioned when you're talking about like donating to the Thurgood Marshall Scholarship Fund and the opportunity to help Black students go to college and get out of school without debt and those kind of things. And anytime that we begin talking about like white Black issues in this country, there are certain terms that come up that especially white people take. I don't know what the word is, offense to. Oh, we'll go ahead.
Sure.
And,
Sure.
so I think what you're hinting at there, and I'll be the one to say it, so you're not on the hook for it. But like, I mean, there's a lot of like privilege when it comes to being white in America. And
Sure.
if I could kind of share my story with you for a second, I don't even know if I've ever told you this. I don't know. The first time I ever heard that word probably was 8, 10 years ago, and I heard it, and like a lot of white people, I reacted as like I'm not privileged. Like I have this like idea in my mind. You hear white privilege is like, oh, your whole life is handed to you on a silver platter, and you've never had a hard day.
Yep.
And I'm like, that's not my experience. That's not how I grew up. That couldn't be more not me. And I think that as more and more white people are getting educated on this topic, it's important to like put clear definitions on some words like that. Because what you were describing was, hey, like a lot of my white friends, their parents paid for their college, and a lot of my Black friends, we couldn't do that. And that I think is the definition of like white privilege. It's having two people at the same point in life, but one has overcome a lot more obstacles than the other. And that one person, more often than not, time and time again, is the white person if it's a white and Black person, even if they're at equal stages.
Right.
And I think that, I guess, could you help other white folks like me? Like, and I'll tell my story. So when I first heard that, I was kind of offended. I was like, that's not me. I've never heard that. And then as I began to learn about it and read about it and understand, then like I started feeling, there's another term that people throw around, like the white guilt. It's like, well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take advantage of a system that I didn't build, that, was built for people of my complexion. And, then, you kind of get into this depression and you like, don't even want to engage in it because you just feel like I've messed up and I'm part of the problem, and it's just this whole like thing. I think that for a lot of white people, we're trying to find how to help and not hurt the situation. And then, when you hear stuff like that, they take it personally, like it's an attack on them instead of an attack on the systems and things that are in place in our country. So I think that when we talk about that kind of stuff, what are some ways that we can, I guess, be more cautious to like, hey, on things that we've done wrong, if you've said things, if you've done things that were harmful or hurtful to your Black friends, we need to repent. And on things that you didn't have a say in, you just reap the benefits of, we need to look at maybe trying to reform those. You posted a great thing on Instagram the other day about like, I think you had the 4R things. If you could walk through that for a second, just kind of talk about some of those steps, because different people are going to find themselves at different places along that route.
Yeah, totally. So let's go back to white privilege for a minute, because I think there would still be some people who would go, I don't have privilege. Okay. And maybe you do, maybe you don't. I would argue that you probably do. Okay. So let me give some history on how this works. You have to go back. Again, this is why I say taking the time to understand the history is really important. So let's go back to before the civil rights movement, where Blacks did not have the right to vote, where it was harder for us to get jobs, where we were working at minimum wage situations because of the oppression in our time, right? If we could even get a job to begin with. Okay. So at this time, there are laws, like not opinion, not, like you can figure this out. There are literal laws that are keeping Black people from being able to accumulate wealth that would affect their family's history and future, right? There are laws. Like, I want to be so clear about what I'm saying. A law, okay? So there's laws that are keeping that from happening. At the same time, there are no laws that are keeping people of other races from having economic prosperity, growth, wealth, etc. Okay, so your grandparents or great grandparents had an opportunity to accumulate wealth that a Black person's grandparents or great parents did not have the opportunity to accumulate. Okay, what happens when your grandparents die, or your great grandparents die, is in their will, they pass on that wealth to the next generation. Okay, if your grandparents or great grandparents didn't have wealth to pass on, then you are now starting behind that generation. So you go down a few generations, and what you find is you have people who are starting at zero, and you have people who are starting further ahead, because there was a period of time in which it was illegal for me to create wealth for my family, and it was legal for another race to be able to do that, right? So that's where privilege comes from. Privilege comes from the fact that your grandparents or your great grandparents had an opportunity to set your family up for success down the road, where my family and my friends' families did not have that opportunity. It's not your fault that you have privilege, but you have to acknowledge the fact that you do, right? So then the question becomes, what do I do with my privilege? If I realize that I have it and I realize that that's not fair, what do I do with my privilege? Well, you do the same thing that Jesus did. You benefit your privilege for the benefit of others, right? You use your privilege for the benefit of others. You leverage the privilege that you've been given to be helpful to people who have not gotten the same privileges. So, how did Jesus do this? Well, he left heaven, came to the planet Earth, discarding his privilege for you and for me. And so we do the same. We go, okay, I have been given a leg up. How can I intentionally use what I've been given to be beneficial to other people? That again goes back to investing in organizations that are trying to help people catch up. That goes to your personal relationships with people. And if you know someone who's struggling, you offer help. You lend a hand. You lend a hand, right? And so we have to make the decision that we're going to use our privilege for the benefit of other people. Now, the post that I made the other day were about some common terms that you hear. You may hear like Black churches or Black leaders use, and it may be kind of hard to understand. So repent is a word that we hear often, that we need white churches or white people in general to repent from, the past, from the original sin of slavery and all that kind of stuff. And when people say repent, they're like, what do you want me to say? I'm sorry? Like I've said I'm sorry 100 times. That's not what repentance actually means. And we got to understand this. This is super important to understand, because outside of grace, this is an important term. Because this is like a biblical term, right? Like this is part of our Christian faith, is repentance. So the Greek word for repentance is actually this word metanoia, and metanoia actually just means a change of mind. So repentance is not I'm sorry. Repentance is I changed my mind. I see things differently, and I'm not going to go back to the person that I used to be. My mind has been changed. And so when we say repentance, we're going, hey, we need people to change their mind about the way that they've seen situations in the past and start to see them differently. Then the next word that I talked about was reconciliation, and I'm going to butcher the official dictionary definition of this, but essentially it's to make one thought compatible with another, right? And so when you hear the word reconciliation, all we're saying is, hey, not only do you need to change the way that you see, but you also need to start seeing things the way that your Black friends see things. Because if you could see the way that we see, then you would understand the way that we feel, right? And so reconcile. Then the next word was reform, and that word reform is all about changing systems, right? Individually, we can make a difference between our family and our friends and the people that we do life with. But if we want to make a difference for the collective people group, we have to change policies. We have to go in and change the systems that have allowed people to be oppressed for years. And so that's reform. And then lastly is reconstruction is the last term, reconstruction. And that idea is to go, okay, now that we've reformed some things, now that we've torn down some old systems, let's rebuild a different America. Let's rebuild a place that is more likely to judge people on the content of the character than the color of their skin, right? And so I say all of this, and some people are probably listening going like, Gerald, where did this come from, right? Like, you were at Brownsbridge for 5 years, you never talked about this. Like, why is this like so important now? Well, the most significant event that's happened in my life since I left Brownsbridge is I had 2 little girls. And the second that these 2 little girls came into the world and I'm holding them, looking at them, this responsibility comes where I go, I can't allow them to live in a world like this. Like, I can deal with it. I can get through it. I can, white knuckle it and go, I got this. It's going to be fine. And I'll deal with the things that happen to me and it'll be okay. But then when you start thinking about the future, when you start thinking about your kids and your kids' kids, you start going, gosh, like, I don't want this world for them. So I have to do something about it now, right? And as a high school student, it's hard to think that way. You don't have a kid that you're looking at, but I think it's still possible to look at the way that the world is and go, hey, if there's going to be a generation that's going to change it, it can be us. And so, what if we decided we're not going to be our great grandparents or our grandparents or our parents' generation? What if we decided we're going to see the brokenness in the world and we're going to do something about it? And so, yeah, those are my thoughts.
Man, that was perfect. That was actually the next question I was going to ask you, is talk about how being a dad has like affected you, and just in seeing all this stuff. So you kind of read my mind there, because for everybody, we didn't go over all this stuff. We were like, we'll wing it. We'll just talk. We both like to talk, so it's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was great, Gerald. And I think that's the thing that I want so many of our students to grasp too. I mean, you talk to a lot of high school students all the time, G, and when I talk to high school students, it's like, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm like, I don't know, but I definitely want to do something that helps people.
Yeah.
And I think that everybody has this innate desire within us to like make it better when we, what we leave everyone better than the way we found it. And I think that's got to be our motivation in all this, man, is to like to make it so that like your little girls don't go through some of the things that you went through, and to make it so that like their kids don't go through the same things that you went through, and to make this place better moving forward. And that's my heart, and that's my motivation, and at least us having this conversation and putting it on the internet. Me and you could have picked up the phone and talked about all this stuff all night and probably, gone a lot longer. But I wanted everybody else to like, I guess, be inspired to have these kind of conversations with their friends who don't look like them, and to have that same opportunity to be like, hey, what do I want the next generation to look like? What am I handing them? What kind of world are they going to be living in? Yeah. And I think that's what, the heartbeat of this conversation was to, try to figure out a way to do it better than it was the world that we were handed. And I think that, every generation is getting better, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
I think that's the big thing I want a lot of people to hear is like, it's not as bad as it was in the 1800s or the 1900s,
right?
Or maybe even the early 2000s. But I want it to be like, 50 years from now, they're like, wow, that's crazy. They used to treat people differently depending on what color their skin was. That's
right.
Wow.
Yeah.
I hope that's what my grandkids say one day.
Yeah.
Well, dude, if it's cool with you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn comments on for a second. And if anybody has any questions, let them just jump in and ask questions for the last couple of that we're on here. Is that cool?
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm going to plug my phone in so it doesn't die here and there.
All right, cool.
Well, jump in.
I'll give everybody a second to think. All right, I'm turning on comments. All right, there you go. If anybody has a specific question when it comes to this kind of stuff, I know that everybody is thinking about it, talking about it, wondering, and I just wanted to give an opportunity for anybody that's listening or tuning in to answer questions. If not, I'll let G get on about his night. I know he's probably exhausted. Andrea said, "What is the best way your white friends have made you feel the most loved and seen during the season?" Great question, Andrea.
Y'all, Heath has that Alabama Wi-Fi, and his phone is breaking up right now.
I thought your phone was breaking up.
No, I got that Alpharetta Wi-Fi. That's you with that Alabama Wi-Fi, bro.
Okay. Andrea said, "What is the best way your white friends have made you feel most loved and seen during the season?"
Yeah, Andrea, that's an unfair question because you can answer that question. Andrea and Mary Ellen actually both texted me in the last 24 hours and just really encouraged me by their text messages. And I'm not going to go into detail because they were private, but I think, man, just like letting your friends of color know that you see them and that you're grateful for them, and letting them know how you've affected their lives or how they've affected your lives and how they've impacted you. Yeah, it just means the world. So that's a great question, Andrea.
That's good. A lot of thanks. A lot of people giving you shout outs in the messages, G. Well, I don't see any questions.
Somebody said, "Can I rename the books that I mentioned earlier?"
Oh, that'd be a great idea.
Yep. So one was The Color of Compromise. The other was Blood at the Root. Be a Bridge Builder by Latasha Morrison. And I want to say this again. Everyone needs to go follow Latasha Morrison, like right now. Like everyone needs to go follow her right now. She's a really great follow. So those 3 books are really great to read for sure.
Yeah, we'll post this talk on our Instagram, and we'll put the books in the comment. I mean, in the caption.
Love it.
Hey, Chandler Burnell. I know you know Chandler. He's a teacher. He said, "What's the best way to support minority students for him as a teacher?" That's a great question.
Gosh, I don't know why the questions aren't popping up on my end. This is weird. The best way for you to support minority students as a teacher is to make sure you see them and to make sure that they know that they're seen. So I would go out of your way to have conversations, to check in with them, to just make sure that they know that they're seen and that they're loved. And like when things like this happen, don't make it weird, but I would just ask like, "Hey, how are you doing? Are you doing okay?" Especially if it's during the school year, because the reality is that they're probably walking into that day heavy. while everyone else is walking into the day. So for a lot of people, not even knowing that the story occurred. But because their parents are probably watching the news, they may be having extra conversations with their parents when things like that happen. And then also just being in Forsyth County, the reality is that the majority of their fellow classmates are white. And so they can feel alone. They can feel like nobody sees them. And so just making sure that they know that they're seen, that they're loved, that they're valuable, and giving them permission to have an off day when things like this happen. Like they may
That's
come
good.
in and have a little bit more of an attitude, and they may come in and be a little bit more disengaged. And I think like as a leader or a teacher, it can be frustrating when you have a student who's usually pretty engaged, or a student who you have certain expectations for, and then they show up and they have an off day. And so I think just understanding like when something like what's happening right now has happened, they're probably going to have an off day, and just giving them a pass for that. So
Yeah, man, that's really good, dude. Well, I don't see any more questions. So, Gerald, before we go, last thing. Okay, I promise I'll let you go after this. All right.
come on.
You've got a new book coming out.
Oh my gosh.
Let's talk about that book real quick. Hey, talk about your new book real quick. Plug it. I'll give you a little plug here for all the people who already follow you on social media. But like, talk about your book and specifically how it relates to this stuff. I mean, I think that's a good topic.
Yeah, so I did write a book in the middle of coronavirus. It's called When Life Gives You Lemons. And the subtitle is Three Must-Ask Questions for Navigating Seasons of Adversity. The thing that's actually kind of funny is I went back and I started listening to Andy's series that he's doing right now, Better For It, and it's all based on the life of Joseph and like how to respond when adversity happens. And that's literally the entire concept of my book. It's like how to bounce back from adversity, all based on the life of Joseph. So I guess that's affirming that like I'm on in line with one of the greatest thinkers and preachers and Bible teachers in the world. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, so there's three questions to ask when we go through really difficult things. I'm not going to get into all the detail of that, but it's there, it's available. So if you want to get it, it comes out on June 15th on Amazon.
That's awesome. That's soon, man. That's a little over a week away.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy.
Awesome.
They want to see babies. Everyone's asking.
I know. Yeah, you should definitely do that. And I'm just gonna make fun of how you and Andy Stanley are on the same level. You guys.
No, let's be very clear.
I'm just kidding, Andy. Please don't fire me.
Okay, thanks.
All right, they want to see the babies. Let's do this.
I'm working on it. Now, listen, y'all. Okay, when you have twins, life is hard. So don't judge my house right now. Oh, is my door locked? Did Kylie lock me into the? Hey, Kai. I think my wife just locked me in the guest room. This is absurd. I can't believe this right now. Kylie!
This is the best way for this to end.
I can't believe this right now. Kai! Y'all, my wife.
Gee, I'm going to rescue you and shut it down. Put them on your story in a minute. Everybody go follow at Gerald Fadayomi. I don't want you to suffer.
I cannot believe my wife locked me in my office right now. This is so weird.
Hey, G, thank you so much for your time tonight, man. I love you. I miss you. I'm thankful for you to be a part of my life, a part of so many people's lives down in these comments. You're the man. We love you, dude.
Love you too, bro. Hey, I miss y'all. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, man, for sure. See you, dude.
Peace.